So welcome everyone to the Food for Thought speaker series. Today we're honored to have Mayor Stephen Fulop, who will be discussing innovation and responsive government in Jersey City. As always, please keep yourself on mute. You can put questions in the chat or leave questions to the end. You can find our recordings and future sessions on our Food for Thought website, which is in the chat. And we're honored to have all of you here for our session. I'll hand it over to Bill to do the introduction. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you for our repeat offenders who have been with us for over 2 years now. So welcome. I'm particularly pleased and honored to have our speaker. I would, for many of the places he fills in our history, but maybe first of all for us is that he's a graduate of SIPA and in particular of the EMPA program. So, and what makes me most proud of him is that so few people these days are willing and strong enough and brave enough to make a career in elective office. It's so important. It is our future, and yet understandably, I'm an offender myself. Too many of us who should don't, because of the challenges it presents, and particularly in terms of your family and your friends and all the trials and tribulations, which I'm sure Mayor Fulop could detail for the entire time we have this recording. But very grateful to him for coming today and for doing what he does. Mayor, thank you for doing this. I want to start out, if you would just tell us a little bit about how you got to be there, about where you were, about 9/11, about your family, about the Holocaust. Tell us a little bit about it.
So let me start by just saying thank you, Professor Eimicke and Valerie and Jeremy, and it's a privilege to be back with the SIPA community here. And I always look forward to being a resource for future and current SIPA grads. So a little bit about myself. I'm a first-generation American. My family is Holocaust survivors. The majority of my family was taken to Auschwitz when they were living on the border of Hungary and Romania. That's the main concentration camp during World War II for the Nazis. There were about 35 of my immediate family members taken, of which 7 survived. And then my grandparents immigrated to this country. With my mom, and I was born here, and I've always viewed public service as kind of a partial payment for citizenship, a lot to be thankful for what this country has offered my family and myself. Went through public school system, eventually got a job at Goldman Sachs, graduating college. I was on a pretty good trajectory relative to my age. And I was working 2 blocks away from the World Trade Center when 9/11 happened. And that just forced me to kind of reassess the things that I thought were important. And I always said that public service was important, that I would have viewed a career in public service as something I would do. But at the time, we were living in peaceful times, and it was a different era. And I never thought it was important before 9/11. And so I reassessed my career at Goldman Sachs. I told them that I was going to leave and enlist in the Marine Corps, which I did. I was subsequently deployed out to Iraq amongst the first troops with the Marines. And then when I came back, I slowly got involved in municipal government via the mayor that was here. Never really thought that this is where I would end up, as I wasn't registered to vote or really involved, but slowly got more and more engaged, and in 2013 won an upset election for mayor, and I just entered my 3rd term this past November.
An amazing story. Maybe just a little bit more on that. Your first foray into elective office, were you successful?
So I was asked in 2005, and at the time, there was some internal disputes within the Democratic Party between then Congressman Menendez and the first African-American mayor of Jersey City. His name was Glenn Cunningham, regarding power structures on local government and things that I didn't pay particular attention to. But when I came back from Iraq, the mayor was looking for somebody to fill out a ticket, and he asked me if I would be the part of the ticket because it made the bottom of the ticket, the more local government offices, easier and a better position on the ballot if they had an entire ballot filled. So he asked me if I was willing to run for Congress against Bob Menendez. I wasn't really, familiar with any of the electoral politics. I knew who Congressman Menendez was, but at the time I thought that maybe I would do this and tell my grandchildren that once upon a time I ran for elected office. I was probably the only person that thought I would win that congressional race. I didn't really understand the political dynamics. I worked hard. I ended up getting a whopping 12%. And through that process, I did have a better appreciation for the ability of government at all different levels to impact people's lives and how people used and needed and requested help. And I really felt more fulfilled doing that than I did working on Wall Street. And so that really forced me to assess kind of what I was doing. The subsequent year, I ran for local office for city council. I won an upset election there, was reelected, large numbers. And then, like I said, was elected to mayor in upset. It was actually the only election that at the time the president in 2013 engaged. We were both Democrats. But the president at the time endorsed my opponent just as the incumbent. So it was really, really a tough election. We were successful. And then we've won 2 other elections by the largest majorities and pluralities in the history of the city. So I like to think that people appreciate the job we're doing. It's one of the best Renaissance stories in the entire country, what's happening here in Jersey City. But, every day is a challenge on local government.
So full disclosure, obviously, I'm a very strong supporter of the mayor. I told Chuck Todd, who's a friend who runs, a very prominent political talk show on Sunday, over a decade ago, that Steve Fulop is going to be the first Jewish American president of the United States. And I haven't changed my opinion yet.
I appreciate that.
I think that's going to happen. And I think Chuck, did meet you, right? Didn't you guys?
We had dinner, and look, you get into some surreal situations here when you're interacting with people that I never thought I would interact with. So obviously, I watched the show, and here I was at dinner in Midtown Manhattan with him, and we're just talking about local politics and national politics, and it was a good introduction, and I'm very appreciative. And you see where these relationships take you, but it doesn't change the fact that still very focused on local government for me.
And because I follow you very closely, as you know, I get all your political mailings and citizen mail. And in some respects, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I actually mean it in a really positive way, Jersey City is becoming a tale of 2 cities. I mean, on the one hand, there's a part of Jersey City that's increasingly looking like downtown Manhattan, which has brought thousands of jobs and property taxes and all sorts of new residents. And then it's a town of communities. And I know because you've graciously had us do some Columbia capstones on affordable housing in your city. There's a whole different city, which it looks more like a normal low-rise, looks like Queens.
Yeah.
So how have you, obviously the people love you. How do you balance those 2 things? And how is it to be a mayor of almost 2 cities at the same time?
Yeah, it's a fair assessment, but one that I struggle with because we really want to have more of an integrated community and not have that division that, it exists in many ways. I'll start by saying that a healthy city is a growing city. When I look at our tax base here, there's only really 2 ways to deal with a municipal budget that just grows every year, not because of any changes on the municipal government's decision-making, just because of the cost of government is no different than running your household. So if you think about energy costs, labor costs, insurance costs, on January 1st, we start the year in a hole the same way that other governments do, not by a choice of decisions we're making, but just by cost of government. And so the only way to deal with that is to have a growing city where you can find new people and new ratables to cover those budget gaps. Or the alternative is to ask the people that are there today, the existing residents, to pay more. And we're always reluctant to do that because there's a conversation around affordability. So the unintended consequence often of a growing city like we've been doing here in Jersey City, where you see kind of development moving away from the waterfront to all the different areas, is you also see and feel some displacement and people feel threatened around housing. And that creates kind of that pressure around the tale of two cities that you mentioned. We've tried to do a lot around inclusionary zoning. We worked with the EMPA capstone program around better assessing our low-income housing, how to better populate it. We've done some creative programs with HUDs about integrating housing on the federal government, but it remains a challenge. It really does, because the proximity to New York has created rents here, not exactly replicating where we are in New York, but they're in that same category, which makes it really, really hard for working families to continue to stay. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I have as mayor. We're doing a lot on the policy front, but the policies generally take a little bit of time to kind of take shape and form.
So COVID,
Yeah.
still around, still causing problems. It looks like the federal government is now once again extending masks for travel. It's been a highly problematic, contentious issue from start to finish. You, by all accounts, have gotten thumbs up by everybody, nationally, statewide, locally, for handling. How have you handled it that you think has made you so exceptional compared to other places?
Yeah, I mean, look, we were the first in the state and one of the best and one of the first in the country to do any sort of shutdowns in early March of 2020. So really, before New York State, before New Jersey, before any municipality, we started to curtail opportunities to do some of the things like nightclubs or bars where there are real presence of large numbers of people. And then obviously more policies came in place. We were very early with vaccination efforts at the local level, very early with booster shots. And I think we put a lot of time into processes around this to make it easier for people and very accessible. Eventually everybody got to the same place. I think we were just very quick and early in doing that. At the same time, when you saw the boost in Omicron last year, we were also reluctant to reinstate some of the mask requirements that you saw reinstated in places like New York or Philadelphia or Newark or Hoboken, despite the pressure that people were putting on me personally. And the reason we were reluctant to do it then was because, I definitely sensed the fatigue that residents were feeling. I thought that residents were more educated with regards to best practices. And then at some point, you have to let the residents be responsible for their own decision making and understand that a little bit more in order to really make sure that they still trust you in your decision making, really tighten the balance of when and how you impose government restrictions and mandates. And so we were cautious around that as well at the end of last year. And I think people appreciated that. Where we are today are numbers very similar to New York, very similar to New Jersey, and the by and large metro area here for New York City. And, I'll be reluctant to institute more mandates absent anything changing dramatically. And like you said, I think that we were quick and nimble, and I think people appreciated that.
And that's why you've gotten such good ratings. Also, the World Economic Forum has designated Jersey City as one of the world's most healthy cities.
Yeah.
Incredible, right? Incredible. Jersey City is well known to us in the metro area. But candidly, as you travel further and further outside the borders of the Northeast, Jersey City is not usually on the international radar screen. Yeah. What attracted them to you, and what do you think led to your designation in that regard?
Yeah, so my first entree into the World Economic Forum was via designation that they gave me as a YGL, which is a program for young people that they designate as young global leaders. And it's a prestigious distinction, gives you entree into a lot of the things that they offer. And I was thankful for that. We started to think a little bit more about how to leverage the World Economic Forum network on things that were important to me, like healthy living, healthy diets. We've done a lot on the city front with regards to education around diet and eating and wellness. Little things from, tens of thousands of supermarket tours for seniors on teaching them how to better read the back of produce or things that they buy, so that they could stretch their dollars further in a healthy way, and then giving them a voucher to spend some money at the supermarket after they go through the tours, things like that, to grants at corner stores and bodegas, teaching them how to maybe highlight some healthier foods as opposed to some of the unhealthy foods when you exit, and how you interact with your customers. The World Economic Forum recognized that we were doing some stuff with Aero Farms, which is the world leader in vertical farming. And they're also affiliated with the World Economic Forum. And what we were doing in Jersey City was trying to create kind of this ecosystem around vertical farming and using technology to create more awareness around healthy living. So when you think about the technology that's offered of places like Aero Farm, you could have 10 or 20 times as many crop turns per year by them knowing with technology the lights and the water that could stress a seed better so that it grows better. So you think about the tastiest, fastest growing arugula plant that you could ever imagine. And that's where technology is. So we thought that we were going to build these vertical farms in Jersey City, in low-income communities, in high population places. You offer the food for free along with classes, and some of the partnerships with like Quest Diagnostic around things that you or I would take for granted, like regular health screenings. All of those things could lead to a better ecosystem around people making healthier decisions for themselves if they're more aware of how diet impacts them and their biometrics. And so we started down the road, and it's been a good partnership with the WEF, World Economic Forum, and a good example of Jersey City using technology and innovation to try and kind of change the dynamic on the ground here.
So just to go a little bit deeper on this issue, the food desert idea and different ways. There's some new in LA. They have a fast food chain that's developing that sells salads, and they have differential pricing. So in the poor neighborhoods, a salad may cost $4, and then the other end of their spectrum at Beverly Hills, they charge $18 for the same salad, and they can make it work. Are vertical farms, is that a long-term upscalable?
Yeah, so the short answer is I don't know. The thing about local government that I love is that, and we've done a really good job, I think our team in Jersey City here, is that we're willing to experiment, try new things. The beauty of the size of Jersey City, which is roughly 300,000 people, and, outside of the cities like New York, it's one of the larger cities in the metro area. We're big enough, diverse enough that you could really try new things, see how it works and impacts different community. It's small enough where you could actually try it and see the impact. In New York City, for example, it's like turning an aircraft carrier in order to try and see if something works. It takes a long time. Here in Jersey City, you don't. So the thought was that people in poorer areas aren't as mindful often because of time constraints or access constraints around things that people in wealthier communities take for granted, such as going for your annual physical or going to the supermarket and being more conscious of diet. Price sometimes makes it, as you said, as an obstacle to doing that. So we were thinking about ways that we can educate and interact with the communities that don't have that same access in order to foster more knowledge around it and ultimately lead to them making better decisions by themselves. Similar to what I said about COVID, that you got to give people the tools and then trust that they're going to make some good decisions themselves. And that's what we were trying to do with the vertical farm. So we're in the early stages of this. 3 of the farms are up and running right now. People are signing up for the program. They're going for the cooking classes. All of that is working where we are creating that ecosystem. How it impacts and how we assess it in the next 5 years will better kind of guide me on whether this is something that we could go beyond the 10 farms and something that's scalable. But the beauty of local government is you could try these things, and you got to be pragmatic about what works and that doesn't work. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not.
It's an interesting area that I'm particularly interested in. So one of the things in Brazil, for example, that they're doing is trying to connect this kind of food thing to the exercise thing to the health clinic. So try to give people, and maybe daycare too. So your health clinic for medical also has cooking classes and also has exercise classes and also has space for kids. And So there are lots of ways.
This is similar a little bit in the sense that, so the thought is that, okay, if I'm, let's say, in a housing site in Jersey City, a lower income housing site, and there's a vertical farm there, and it's free access to everybody, the food that's there, and the crop turns are very, very fast because of the technology. And I'm saying to somebody, look, you have free access to the food here. What we would recommend, it's not required, is that you kind of take these classes or here's some cooking guidelines to help you with what you can do with what we're giving you. It's not a requirement, but it's just, hey, here's some options, healthier options to do with this sort of thing that we're giving you. Right. Classes around that. Also, the partnership with Quest Diagnostic is to give people free health screening, biometric stuff that you and I take for granted. So if you eat healthier over 3, 4, 5 months, you obviously see your biometrics change in a favorable way. People more conscious of that tend to make more decisions that lead again in that same direction because they're tangibly able to see the progress there. Yeah. The World Economic Forum gave us a partnership with Oura Rings, which also does some of the biometrics. So they're distributing those as part of the program here. So the thought is that maybe the gap that exists on health in some of those communities is really around knowledge as much as access. And if we could solve some of that stuff and really tangibly show people the changes that can happen, and technology makes it more accessible, and they're going to ultimately make better decisions. That's the belief. And we'll see in a couple of years whether it proves itself out, but it's worth trying, because anything and any time that you could lengthen somebody's life and give them healthier outcomes, it's worth experimenting on it. And we have the means to do it and the partnership, so why not?
So I got two others in health related, but different. So you made a big focus on open space and park, getting more places for people to be outside. For health, I think, but also for building community and making a more livable environment. Could you tell us a little bit about that initiative and how it's going?
Yeah, I mean, it's going. We are building several huge parks in the city. We're acquiring property, knocking down buildings. We're repositioning streets that were formerly for cars as a priority as now open space. Look, I think the last 2 years has highlighted more than any time in the last several decades the importance of open space and space in general in urban areas. And that's led us to kind of reassess a lot of our even zoning. So if you think about kind of a place like Jersey City, how we approached balconies and outdoor space and open space prior to the pandemic, we're rethinking some of those things because there's a higher priority around those things now as people know and appreciate it a little bit more. So we've been doing a good job of expanding the open space. As we grow as a city, this becomes a premium as well and a big priority for us.
So it's going to transition to the next one, but public-private partnerships in New York City, one of the ways that they've improved or kept public spaces going when the city budget just couldn't handle it or wouldn't handle it is partnerships with conservancies and nonprofits and community-based friends of parks or whatever. Has that movement reached Jersey City? Is it something that...
Yeah, we have some of the conservancies. They do a good job, but ultimately, for the most part, they're volunteers and they live within those parameters and constraints of time that we all have. So it's challenging to solely rely on them for a lot of the construction or maintenance or upkeep of the parks. So we've worked on the private side via leveraging development to force developers to build large parks, which has worked. And then generally speaking, even when there's an active community group, I mean, the city has shouldered the burden of really all fronts of growth and maintaining. I mean, the community groups are great, but again, they're all volunteers and we appreciate the commitments, but at the end of the day, they have the same time limitations.
Last health related, but it's maybe most people think of it that way, is electric vehicles. There's a lot of consumer movement, or talk at least, but consumer movement. We've been slower as a nation and a world to think about municipal fleets and police cars and fire equipment and EMS. You're one of the few cities that I know about in the country that has begun electric sanitation vehicles. I think
Yeah.
is that right? And
Yeah, I mean, we're converting all of our cars actually to our entire vehicle fleet to electric. We're doing it gradually via attrition. We just purchased 5 electric garbage trucks. We've installed, I think up to now, 10 different locations throughout the city for public charging stations. So, you know, the thought is that, yes, it's a priority for us to do our part with moving away from gas vehicles to electric vehicles where possible, and then building the infrastructure so that residents can feel that they also can make that migration over to electric vehicles. So Jersey's been a leader on this front, and it's a good investment. We're going to continue doing it. We have an aggressive plan to kind of build out the infrastructure around electric charging stations for the public. We're already well ahead of anybody else in the region, but we're just going to continue that investment because that's the only way you're going to get people to actually transition and make the decision themselves if they feel that there is accessibility to the charging stations. Otherwise, they won't do it.
Right. Sort of related, I think, is you have done a lot on participatory budgeting. This is a concept that's been around a long time.
Yeah.
It sounds good. A lot of advocates always pitch it, but in reality, it very seldom goes anyplace. The state of Oregon did it pretty aggressively decades ago with some success, but ultimately when the people behind it left office, it kind of petered out. There's some of this happening in Brazil, I happen to know, and a few local governments, but you seem to be trying to make a commitment to that.
Yeah.
How can it be done and how could it be sustained?
So we have a couple of different models that we're experimenting with. So going back to kind of what I said earlier about the opportunities for experimentation and trying things, that local government really are the laboratories of change. Participatory budgeting is a great example on the local front. So we have 2 individual boards that are set up community driven via dollars that are allocated for set purposes. One is an open space tax surcharge that the voters ratified a couple of years ago, and we implemented that. All of those dollars, it's several $1 million per year, is allocated by community residents and community boards. Municipal elected officials have nothing to do with it. There's a similar structure in place with an arts trust fund that was also ratified. We're the first city in the region, one of the first in the country, to set up an arts trust fund to help the nonprofit and the arts communities that generally struggle with fundraising and sustainability long term. And so similarly, there's a different structure in place to allocate dollars on that again, municipal government, myself, elected officials have no control over. That's several $1 million. Those programs are both working fairly well. This year, we've started with a little bit more of a direct participatory budgeting model where via the city's website, people can submit ideas and they'll go through a process where ultimately we'll allocate dollars towards those things. It could be anything from a social service thing in your ward to infrastructure stuff in your ward. And we're trying to engage as many residents as possible with the hope that if they engage more in the budgetary process, they'll be more knowledgeable of government, ultimately vote, be engaged, and more conscious of government, which will lead to better outcomes. So we're trying our best to engage as many people as possible, but it's not easy work because there's a lot of apathy that we see in Jersey City is the same as everywhere.
Yeah, and it's hard too, right? Everybody's got a job, they got a family, they're focused on those issues. And then even if they want to get involved in the budget process, conceptually, if you're an outsider, it can be very daunting, you know?
Yeah.
What do I know about public budgeting? You know, I work on computer coding, or I work in a factory, or how can I, even if I wanted to, how can I meaningfully participate? Is there any outrage to people to tell them it's you don't need to be an expert?
It's significant outreach. And what we try to convey is that I'm biased in this, but your local government is more impactful on your day-to-day life than your state government or your federal government. Of course, those decisions matter, what happens at those levels of government, but ultimately, it's your local government that you deal with day in, day out. How does your police department function? Does your fire department respond? Is there ambulatory services? What does that park look like? How are your dollars allocated? The challenge that we have is that everybody votes in a presidential election, but you have those huge drop-offs on local mayor election and council elections, when in reality, their budgets and their decisions impact your life more on the day-to-day business than who maybe your congressman is, who could be a backbench congressperson with minimal impact on what happens in the federal government. So we try to hammer that home as much as possible, because it happens to be true, and it happens to be something that people need to be more aware of. And we try to tie that into the participatory budgeting dynamic to say, hey, here's an easy way that you could actually tangibly see your vote and your input having a outcome in your specific neighborhood for a program or something that you want.
So I got two more and then I'll open it up.
Yeah, sure.
So one is, you got interested in a program in Israel that engages everyday people to provide much quicker response than any EMS could ever do. When people are calling 911 and they're traumatized, maybe they're having a heart, who knows? Even in the best of places, 6 minutes, 5 minutes is what it takes an ambulance to get there. This program in Israel that you adopted before COVID, maybe you could talk about what happened during COVID and what's happening now, which trains citizens who are like right in the area to be able to go to the person and intervene and stabilize them until EMS gets there. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the program, which we call United Rescue here, again, speaks to accessing technology to kind of change how we think about a traditional municipal service, which in this case is EMS or ambulatory services. So, you know, in a place like New York City, to use an example, if you live in a 40-story building and somebody on floor 37, a densely populated building, somebody on 37 has a choking incident or a heart attack or stops breathing, more than likely in those other 40 stories and hundreds of apartments, more than likely there is a medical professional that can help, that can respond if they wanted to, more than likely they do, but they wouldn't know about it because there's no mechanism for them to be aware that on 5 floors away from them, there is an individual that stopped breathing. And so how do you solve for that? The United Rescue Program, which was originally in Israel and wildly successful, creates kind of a volunteer network after they go through training here in Jersey City. It's 40 hours of training in conjunction with the Jersey City Medical Center. Then they're given a small, it looks like a backpack, but inside the backpack is basically everything that an ambulance would have minus the stretcher. So you have access to oxygen and defibrillators and all sorts of things. And so the thought process was that via technology, your phone, an Uber-style map, and an app that if you wanted to be engaged or not be engaged, you could turn it on or turn it off. If there was something that happened in close proximity, the technology would recognize that, let's say in the 40-story building where Professor Eimicke lives on floor 37, it would recognize that he can respond and be at that scene quicker than the ambulance can. So I'm going to dispatch him with the equipment that he has, because he's told me he wants to be involved and went through the training, and simultaneously dispatch the ambulance the same way that I would normally. And the thought process there is that in an instance of, let's say, stoppage of breathing or heart issues, those 30 seconds, that minute and a half gap is vital to life and death. So if I get a medical professional there in that time, often it saves lives. So originally when we said, okay, we're going to try it and we're going to grow with this program a little bit, I would have been happy if you told me 5 or 10 people would volunteer their time to supplement the EMS ambulatory services in the city and go through this training, purely volunteer. I mean, we had hundreds of people go through the program, and it was wildly successful pre-COVID. During COVID, it obviously changed because people were reluctant to have non-EMS or ambulatory people, or anybody for that matter, inside their home. And we wanted to be conscious of that. So we're just now starting to re-engage it with the medical center, get people back involved who wanted to. But it's a good example of kind of rethinking traditional services and how do you leverage technology that exists today in order to better serve residents. And it's a great example of, hey, how do I get that medical professional who's a couple floors away there in a shorter amount of time? And during the pre-COVID era of this, I mean, we had the fastest response time in the country, and it's in no small part because of the technology leveraging.
It's it's as you know, I've been most of my adult life associated with the FDNY, and the reality is that the need for this kind of service is getting greater and greater and greater. We have, as you know, a new community or mega city within a city at Hudson Yards,
Yeah,
which is upper income for the most part. If you're on the 40th floor and you have a heart attack, you're dead, period.
yeah, I think that's right.
Because there's no way that we can get an ambulance to you to intervene to save your life. And actually, there are significant academic studies that show this. So if you live above the 40th floor in any major city and you have a heart incident, you're dead.
And in the case of like using Hudson Yards as an example, what we saw with some of the buildings here was it wasn't only the volunteer or medical professional that said, hey, I want to be a part of this United Rescue Program. It was often the building owners had somebody, an employee in their building, maybe the doorman or at the front door, go through this. So that way, when that 40th floor resident calls 911, he's not calling the front desk, of course. He's calling 911, I need an ambulance right away. And there's no reason that 911 system shouldn't be able to route instantaneously, yes, the ambulance out to you, but also tell if that doorman is trained, hey, take that defibrillator up to floor 37 right now before the ambulance gets there. And that saves lives ultimately. And that's an easy thing that in a place like Hudson Yards, you can do that ultimately save lives.
Absolutely. So that's a great program. So I saved the worst for last, or the most difficult. And, we had an incident, as I'm sure you know, in the subway here in Brooklyn yesterday. You also, I'm sure, know that, crime is significantly up in New York City. Homicides took a tick down last month, but still all crime is up significantly. We went through a lot of trauma on the opposite direction for over-policing, if you will, and police violence and Black Lives Matter. All through the last 2 years. So we come out the other end and now we have both problems, right? We still have the issue of, if you will, over policing and over aggressive policing, but now we also have rising crime and violent crime, and people want both, right? People want less police and people want more police. How is that playing out in Jersey City, and how are you trying to deal with that issue?
It's the same dynamic. Fortunately, we've seen a gradual decrease in crime. People should realize that it's generally not linear when crime goes down. You'll see it moving, but you want to see it trending in a favorable direction downward. For a long time, New York was in that predicament. COVID obviously changed that. There's a lot of reasons why. The thing that I feel for Mayor Adams, and I know this from being a new mayor when I started this job 8 years ago, is that it does take a little bit of time to get your feet underneath you and the team that you want in place and the policies. And the challenge that he has is that New York City in particular has a sense of no patience, urgency. I want action right now, and that's really, really tough. I think that him reinstituting the plainclothes officers was a good decision. We never got rid of ours here in Jersey City. We've seen generally speaking, 300 to 400 guns coming off the street per year via that unit in Jersey City, population of 300,000 people. So those sort of things have an impact. And then, he's advocating for bail reform, which I also think is a meaningful thing for him to lean into. We have the same challenges on bail reform in Jersey City. I mean, 2 days ago is a good example. 2 days ago on NJ.com or in the Star Ledger, you could have read that, no, we made an arrest of 3 individuals with gun charges. One of those individuals we arrested in February of this year with a gun charge. And we also arrested him in end of 2018 for a shooting charge. All you could see on NJ.com. The reality is that often the criminals I mean, they don't believe that there are penalties to that, and they make decisions around the fact that there are no penalties for these decisions or meaningful penalties. And so until that balance comes back into kind of reality around violent crime, you're not going to be able to see the progress that you want to see. So those are just some real issues that I think Mayor Adams is dealing with. And I think generally he's doing a pretty good job in a really, really tough environment to do it.
So I'm going to give somebody else a chance. Please either raise your hand in the chat or put something in the chat, or just open your mic up. And not often you get to talk to a mayor of a large city one-to-one.
I see Jonah.
Yeah, there's a couple of hands. Jonah?
Yes, thank you all so much, Valerie and team, and Professor Eimicke and Mayor Fulop, for this great session. I'll quickly just engage in some transparent flattery before asking my question. I moved to Journal Square area of Jersey City in 2017 and reflect very fondly on my 2 years as a resident, where I was able to enjoy, parks and basketball courts with great views and free concerts that I know your office organized, and especially really treasured my weekend trips to Wonder Bagels, which I miss dearly as I now live in Harlem. But for my question, as mayor of one of the most diverse cities in America, what SIPA course or area of involvement during your EMPA would you say most influences and affects your day-to-day work now? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, look, the things that resonated with me the most was the work really that I did around, budgetary work. I remember at the time I was working fairly closely with Professor Banker. I don't know if he's still there. And we did a lot around municipal government and, making decisions. And I remember thinking through a lot of the decision makings around how a budget is structured and works, and municipal finance. And look, I think the reality of my job is trying to balance, that increase in social services and that increase in, or that balancing that increase in social services and resources overall with affordability and making sure that the city's manageable. So to me, that was really an important skill. The second part I'd ask you is, why did you move out of Jersey City? Why did you leave Journal Square or Jersey City as a whole?
Well, I actually, an unanticipated consequence of moving, I now work at Columbia Law School, so I love my 10-minute walk and commute, but I do miss taking the ferry, which was a beautiful way to commute, and I actually am down in terms of my podcast intake about an hour and a half each day, because I used to really use that period of time to warm up in the morning. So I would never rule it out as a location I might return to.
Yeah, I'll tell you that in Journal Square, there's a lot of exciting things happening. I mean, for starters, the Centre Pompidou from Paris, largest collection of modern art in all of Europe, will be opening in Journal Square. We're scheduled end of 24, early 25. We're building that out. So some of the most significant artwork that they have will be in Jersey City in Journal Square. They have a satellite location in Shanghai, one in Brussels, and then there'll be Jersey City. And then we're also, a partnership with the Devils Entertainment. We are redoing the Lowe's Theater, which is very much like the Brooklyn Kings Theater. It is one of the Lowe's Wonder Theaters. It is magnificent. It's a $100 million project. And then we're creating actually a new park where you would be familiar with this, not everybody who's watching, but where the old courthouse was, which will be a significant, large, new open space for the Journal Square area. And I share that because it touches on some of the things that Professor Eimicke referenced earlier with regards to open space, investing in resources. And one of the things we're also doing is leaning hard into arts and culture, as ultimately that's what makes a city a desirable place to live. So having resources, arts, culture, nightlife, those are the things that really made New York City what it is. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support that on the local level. And Journal Square is a great example of where, for us, that epicenter is going to be.
Michelle's next, but before Michelle, if you grant me 2 points of order. One, Professor Banker has retired, but Brian Kennedy, who's a fellow EMPA alum and also not a Goldman Sachs alum, he's still at Goldman Sachs.
Okay, great.
That course, and he's one of our best teachers. And as a clarification, when you said Devils, you didn't mean Satan, you meant the hockey team, correct?
I meant the hockey team. That's right. Devils Entertainment. It's actually Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment. So they own the Devils. They own, I think, Crystal Palace and the Premiership. I mean, they're the 76ers, but they're getting more involved in live venues, live entertainment. And the Lowe's Theater will be a 3,000 seat theater that opened in 1929, and we're redoing it so that it feels like, you know, that magnificent theater that opened up at the end of the Roaring '20s. And it's really going to be a special thing for Journal Square, Jersey City, and North Jersey. And it sits on top of the Journal Square path.
Michelle?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Mayor Fulop. So I have a question, and it's pertaining to some of what you discussed regarding the vertical farms and, you know, some of the communities, the lower income neighborhoods being basically food deserts, and, you know, you wanting to make sure that the information was out there on how to live a healthier lifestyle and things of that nature. But I think
Michelle, we're also doing it in our public schools, the vertical farms right now. So there's a couple of the public schools. There's a vertical farm being built in City Hall, which is in the downtown area, maybe more affluent, it's perceived. So they're divided up across the city into different demographics and different groups that we really want to target, and some of the senior buildings. So just to kind of give you a little bit of flavor, I should have gotten more into that as well, but go ahead.
Okay. No, that's wonderful, by the way. But I think one of the things that really, me personally, what I feel like I've seen in a lot of lower income communities is, you know, I know that there's a push for people to eat healthier and live better, but I think one of the root causes in a lot of communities is not just that it's a food desert and vertical farms being an option for people to learn to eat better and live better, but I feel like sometimes companies are almost predatory, where you'll see a lot of Popeyes, a lot of McDonald's, you see those sorts of restaurants in these communities, and people will go there, not always because they want to. And I know we all love great fast food at times, but I realize one of the root foundational issues is actually the fact that a lot of people, this is their best option financially, you know? And I think one of the things that also, and I'm sure you guys are working on, if you haven't already have these programs in place, is people don't make enough money. And sometimes people don't make enough money because they don't have the skills to make that money. So when you have a single mom, or even if there are two parents in the household, they just don't have enough income to go to Whole Foods, where another community, they can go to Whole Foods, live better, which in the end, they end up having better checkups because they're probably doing all that it takes to live a healthier lifestyle. So when you have a mom who works 24/7, and she, in her heart, she knows that, you know what, I probably shouldn't be buying this right now, but this is the fastest thing. Not only is it the fastest thing, it's probably, this is what I can afford right now. Or even if they go to the supermarket, they're buying those items that they feel like they can have their money stretch a little bit. So I think one of the foundational things that a lot of cities need to address is, what programs do we have in place? What programs are we implementing to get people at that foundational level, that where they need to have skills to build themselves up as individuals, where they can live a lifestyle where they have the money to actually pay for items and live better, where they no longer have to be in a category of low income, you know? So what programs do you have in place that are addressing those root issues, you know? Go ahead. Thank you.
I don't want to cut you off, Michelle. I think it's a really, really good point. Couple things. So first, let me just tell you, on the city side, we've done our best to kind of lead from the front, even though we're conscious of budgets. I touched on that earlier. You know, we've changed the starting salaries here. Nobody starts for less than $18 an hour. That's the lowest laborers that we have here in Jersey City. It's higher than any other municipality, I assume, in the area. And that's, of course, plus all pension and healthcare benefits, all of that included on top of that. So we're trying our best to send the message, exactly what you said, that in the New York City metro area, you cannot live on $11, $12, $13, or even $15 an hour. So we're trying our best to slowly create that upwards pressure by raising the minimum wages. We've invested in social services for sure. We have an employment and training office located on the south side of the city, which I think does a very, very good job, both on underemployed and prisoner reentry type initiatives. And that's around training, everything from more professional skills to basic CDL license type programs, which we'll hire immediately if somebody goes through the program. And we try to work through the churches and the community groups to educate the public around that. And then third thing I would say is, yes, you are 100% correct around accessibility for different types of food in certain areas and what's convenient. What we have done in the last 2 years is we have partnered with Via, so a similar competitor to Uber, but in a different way than what you might see Via in New York City in an urban area. It is a municipal subsidized rideshare program that competes with the bus system right now, predominantly servicing transit deserts. So for $2, that system will take you anywhere in the city if you live in one of those transit deserts, to kind of compensate for the accessibility issues that lower income communities have. So that has been wildly successful. Last year, we had 500,000 rides on that. So we're trying our best to deal with some of the issues, because I do think what you said is valid, that, you know, sometimes people make decisions because it's the easiest to make, because you're struggling with 2 or 3 jobs and barely getting by. And so maybe that Popeyes, which is next door down the street, is just an easier decision. We're trying our best to get people out of that mindset and also create the mechanisms for them to not make those decisions.
One last comment I would like just to say is this: I would love for cities to, and I'm sure cities are doing that, but I would love to see it more, entice. I see it in Harlem, you know, the Whole Foods. I want them to entice some of these stores like Whole Foods, Mrs. Green's, the Trader Joe's into these communities so that they can have those options. When it comes to employment, I would love for there to be a continuum as far as education, where in the schools, trades are offered in the schools again. I would love to see that, because when kids are in high school and they're going to school for electrical or something like that, it's easier for them. They learn that skill at that level, at the high school level. As soon as they get out, they can go ahead and say, well, I'm an assistant journeyman, or I'm something of that nature. And then the last thing, I'm so sorry, this is the very last thing.
I think that's a great point, Michelle. Great.
This is in regards to the police presence. Do I feel that we need more police? Maybe, maybe not. But one of the things that I do believe that cities need to invest in technology that's going to prevent a lot of crimes. There are cameras that are not in places where they should be. Maybe they should look into further technologies that will really protect people. I feel like sometimes cities are very reactionary rather than proactive. And I feel like it takes something to happen before they say, okay, let's do something. And I know that being in office is not an easy thing, because it's like sometimes you can be polarized. You're being pulled in different directions, all to, just to satisfy the needs of the public. But those are some of the things. I would like to see more police, yes, but I still would like for them to be gentle with the community, of course, while doing their job. More technology, just so we can all feel protected.
Yeah, I agree with you on the policing technology front. We've done our best to do the body cameras. We've invested in a lot of technology as far as redoing the whole CCTV camera system throughout Jersey City, millions of dollars. We've also invested a lot in our human capital around training, diversifying the police department. When I came in, it was predominantly white. We've hired close to 450, 500 officers. 70% of them are minority. We're the first major police department in the country to have a civilian African-American woman running the police department. So we're trying our best to, work on multiple fronts to, deal with the traditional views of policing, leverage technology the same way that you say, and then investing in the human capital ultimately, so people don't feel that the police department in their neighborhood is like an occupying force as opposed to kind of community building. And that's really what we're trying to get to. And we're not perfect on that. I'm not here to say we're perfect. We've got a lot of work to do, but we are mindful in investing in that.
So after we get Mayor Fulop elected, President Fulop, I'm going to convince him to introduce a negative income tax so that anybody who gets a job ultimately is guaranteed a livable income, so that, you know, Jeff Bezos is actually going to pay 10% of his revenue. And if you work at a job, it's not going to be on the local pizza guy to pay you $25 an hour. You'll pay what the market is. And then instead of having money taken out of your check, you'll get money put in your check. So you'll take home the $40,000 or $50,000 that you need to live in. And I'm sure that President Fulop will at least listen a little bit on
I
that.
always listen to your ideas. I always do. And I've often implemented them, actually. So we'll see.
Jeremy, I think we have time for, no, we don't. I'm afraid that we're out of time. And I promised Mayor
Thank
Fulop
you.
we would get him out of here at 1 o'clock. Mayor, President, friend, alum, thank you so much. It was a great
thank you. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And Valerie will let you know the next food for thought will be coming your way quite soon. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
everyone.
Mayor.
Thank you,
Thank
Mayor.
you.